All right, guys. Well, anyway, time to get started. So my tips today are my top 10 tips as far as having an average order. And, some of it's mentality, some of it is just how I phrase certain things, and some of it is just some lines I put into my presentation. So it's a little bit of all of it. And I'm going to make sure your managers get my handout to you as soon as I'm done. But you want to make sure you're still taking notes to help you kind of retain the information rather than just, assuming like, oh, I'm going to get a handout, so what's the point? Because I want to make sure you're able to implement some of these things into your presentation rather than just hear me talk. So my first tip is to love the one you're with. Like that old song. And the point is to love the one you're with and love the customer you're with. Give them the best demo you can. Like that was my main goal when I did every time I do a presentation. You want to make sure that you're giving that customer the best presentation you've ever given. Like that's the whole mentality every single time. Like it doesn't matter where they live or whatever the stigma is before you meet them, or if the customer had said something about them beforehand. Can't tell you how many times I've had customers be like, yeah, I'll put this person down, but I'm not sure if they're going to buy. And then they still bought big because I went in there trying to give them the best presentation I can. Like it doesn't matter what their house looks like or whatever. I barely, like some people Zillow houses, and I barely do that just because I don't want to have a pre-existing expectation before I do the demo. So, the first thing, like I said, is to give each customer the best demo you can. Love the one you're with. And you shouldn't worry about rushing to the next appointment. Like you may have a big day stacked up, but it's okay if I'm a little bit late to the next demo because I don't want to sell the previous customer short, because you never know how it's going to go. Like you don't want to assume that the next presentation is going to be better. So like, let me just ship this one in. Like you want to give this one the best one possible because that one might be a great demo. Like, yeah, I mean, you never want to hold back on the presentation. So number 2 is to know your customer. So you want to get to know at least 3 interesting facts about them before you start your presentation. So I know these things don't sound like it's going to, give you something crazy to have a massive average order for those first 2, but I mean, the point of it is you got to have the right feeling going into the presentation in order to sell big. Like you got to have the right mentality for it, and you got to get to know your customer. Like it's not just getting to know them, but you want to feel like you know them by the time you start your presentation. So you want to know some interesting facts about them, like what they do for a living, but not just what they do for a living, but how they got into it. Like I like to ask them, it's like, oh, what do you and your husband do for a living? And it's like, oh, what got you into that? And then they'll really start talking a lot about when they were young and then they, met someone and they got them into this job position or whatever. I'm like, they might just tell you this elaborate story. And that's kind of what you want. You want them to really open up to you. And then next is how many kids they have and like what they want to do when they grow up. And those are always funny stories. And then I also like to talk about how they met as a couple. Like, it's like, oh yeah, so how'd you guys meet? And then that's typically some elaborate story as well. And that really helps you get that connection that, you're looking for. And there's times where I want to start my presentation, but then I stop myself. I'm like, wait, no, I don't feel like I know them well enough yet. So I keep building rapport. So you kind of have to like hold off on it, because you might want to, unless they're like, hey, so what was it you want to show me? And then they're just trying to kind of rush you to it. And when that happens, that's what I'm kind of looking for. Someone to be like forget why we were talking and then be like, oh yeah, so what was it you want to show me again? And then I go into my tip number 3. So this is my opening value phrase that I say when I start my presentation, to right off the bat, start building that value and that expectation that it's not going to be cheap, but cheap stuff isn't good. So my phrase is, oh yeah, so I'm here to show you Cutco, which is the world's finest cutlery. And as you do know, the finer things in life do tend to cost more, but I'm here to show you why. And I always like to throw a smile at the end. So that's what I like to say is, I'm here to show you Cutco, which is the world's finest cutlery. And as you do know, the finer things in life do tend to cost more, but I'm here to show you why. And then number 4, my 4th tip is become the kitchen consultant. So right here, is kind of the moment where they realize that they're in a presentation and you kind of consult with them about it. It's not just the fact that you're some high school or college kid that is just running through these steps and they have to sit there and listen to it. Like, this is when you kind of get a feel for them and they realize what kind of cook they are, and you're kind of diagnosing them for as far as like what kind of cook they are. And I ask these main questions right when I get to the point of, do you cook because you have to, like to, or love to? So I have that as one of the bullet points on my handout, just so you know exactly when you start implementing these questions. So I know you all have that part at least, but then this next part is basically what I start adding behind it. So the first question is, or after that, you want to make sure you write all these down too, by the way. But the first thing is, how many nights a week do you cook? So how many nights a week do you cook, Ms. Jones? And then I write this down. And when I hear 1 to 2, I'm thinking homemaker set. When I'm thinking 3 to 4, I'm thinking signature set. And 5 to 7, I'm thinking ultimate set or complete set, because that's what I like to call it. But as far as I know, you think 1 or 2 is just like, oh, that's so little. But the average American cooks 2 nights a week, about 1 to 2 nights a week. And the homemaker was designed back in 1949 for your basic household needs. So, you know, for the average American pretty much. And it's normally 2 nights of cooking, 2 nights of leftovers, 2 nights of eating out, and then 1 night of ordering in like takeout or pizza or something like that. But anyway, the point is that when I hear 1 to 2, I'm like, oh, okay, that's about average. And they're like, really? Because a customer, that's one of the customers who they're like thinking you're just going to be walking through this presentation with you, just going, it's just like, yeah, I'm just going to walk through these steps and just to help this kid out. I'm not that much of a cook is what they're thinking. So when you say when they say like 1 or 2, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's about average. They're like, oh, okay. And then I hear more than 2. If they're like, yeah, like 3 or 4, I'm like, oh, wow, that's above average. Normally it's like 1 or 2. And they're like, oh, really? Like, then they start realizing how much more of a cook they are. Like I said, you're kind of diagnosing them at this point. So then they kind of get more engaged with it. They're like, oh, I guess this is more for me than I thought. And then the next step is, or the next question rather is, how much would you spend if you were to eat out as a family? And you want to write that number down, because that number is really important. You want to write all these down, actually, guys. You want to make sure you keep note of everything on this. But that one especially, because you're going to be able to use that in the close. And if some of you guys were for my talk back last Tuesday, then you know you'd understand why. And I'm going to get to that here in a minute. But if you were, and then the next question is, if you were entertaining, how many place settings would you normally have? 8, 10, 12, 24, or like 40 or 50? So, I mean, you guys can probably make the assumption as to why I asked those questions. 8, I'm thinking homemaker because the table knives. 10, I'm thinking signature. 12, I'm thinking complete set. 24, I'm thinking 2 flatware chests. And like 40 or 50, you know, keep just going from there as far as like flatware or table knives or whatever they may be trying to get. So again, I'm trying to diagnose them and kind of think about what set is best for them. So if they're like, oh yeah, I normally sit 12 people, or they're like, oh, I have like crazy parties here, or I have like tons of people, or all the family comes over, like you're going to kind of get to know that. So you can be like, oh, well, Miss Jones, you know, I know you want to get 1 flatware chest, but you normally have like 24, 25 people here for Christmas, right? You don't have to pick who gets the good stuff. She's like, oh yeah, true. And I mean, like Andrew Smith, actually, I remember him doing that exact thing with a customer, and then they got 2 chests right there just because you use logic with them. Because, I mean, if you didn't ask that question, you wouldn't know, and then you wouldn't be able to use that logic. The next thing is, if you were to design the perfect knife set, what kind of qualities would you want your knives to have? And always number 1 is like, oh, I want them to stay sharp. I'm like, okay, stay sharp. And then you want to write these down, and you want to kind of coax them to certain questions if they don't really know what to say. Like, you know, you can just kind of ask them like, oh, well, would you like it to be comfortable? Like, yeah, okay. And would you want it to be dishwasher safe? Do you ever put your knives in the dishwasher, Miss Jones? And then they're like, oh yeah, all the time. But I know you're not supposed to. I'm like, yeah, typically not, because it can, you know, warp the blade or crack the handle or something. Or, I mean, but I love it when customers are like, oh no, you're never supposed to put your knives in the dishwasher. And you're like, yeah, I know, right? But wouldn't you want to, just for convenience? or just in case someone did. And they're like, oh yeah, that'd be nice. I'm like, okay, dishwasher safe. And would you want your knives to have any guarantees? You know, if you're spending a lot of money on them, right? And they're like, oh yeah, guarantees would be nice. I'm like, okay, guaranteed. And then I also love it when they're like, oh, like a lifetime guarantee. Who's lifetime? Those things are bogus. And I'm like, yeah, I know, right? And then I go into it as far as how I'll go into the guarantees in a little bit. But anyway, that's tip number 4, become the kitchen consultant. Number 5 is how to create massive credibility. And these are some money lines that I say during the presentation to help create that massive credibility. And some of them I've learned from other CSPs and stuff. And I've learned this first line from Lauren Horton. I learned it at my first SC1 meeting ever. So basically how it goes is when I'm getting into about the product, you know, Cutco's been around since 1949. We've all been made in the USA. And one thing that Cutco really does is we take modern technology and old school craftsmanship and put them together to make something truly unique. And I do that hand motion every time, you know, because I really like to talk with my hands, and I feel like it helps bring, you know, energy to the presentation. So it's important to kind of talk with your hands during it. But I like to I'm like, so what Cutco does is we take modern technology and old school craftsmanship and put them together to make something truly unique. And then I like to say, you know, when you're going through the different things about Cutco, we've been involved in, you know, all these different things, been on, you know, Modern Marvels, Made in America. I'm talking about all that stuff. And then the White House chefs actually use Cutco. And during the Cold War, President Reagan actually gave the leader of Russia, which is Gorbachev, actually gave him a Cutco knife set to demonstrate American ingenuity. And also Gorbachev ended the Cold War, and I'd like to think Cutco had something to do with it. And Miss Jones always laughs every single time. Like, they love that part. And also one fun fact is that we actually don't make serrated knives. It's a big misconception, is that we make serrated knives, because we don't. And we make our double D edge. And I'll go into the double D edge later, but just so you know, the double D edge was actually licensed for eye surgeries at one point because it's so sharp. So, you know, again, these are things that are helping build that credibility as far as facts about the history of Cutco and, you know, why we're the best. All right, so that's my 5th tip as far as creating massive credibility during the company history. And number 6 is to help identify a need. So this is a phrase that you're going to use a lot during the presentation, just to help make sure that the customer is not, you know, again, to make them feel like they're more of a cook than they thought. So the first thing is, or the phrase I use for every one of these questions is, do you maybe sometimes ever? And you sometimes maybe ever make sandwiches? You sometimes maybe ever chop vegetables, grill out, bake? You know, these are things that you can say during the presentation. And, you know, it's not like, oh, do you bake all the time? It's like, oh, no, I mean, I don't bake all the time. But it's like, do you maybe sometimes ever bake a cake? And it's like, oh, maybe for my kid's birthday, yeah. Or it's like, you maybe sometimes ever grill out. And it's like, oh, well, if I'm, you know, 4th of July or something like that. Do you maybe sometimes ever cut up watermelon in the summer? You ever cut up potatoes? You know, if you ask that question, it's good for that cheese knife. I think is sweet on potatoes. Do you ever cut lemons and limes? Do you ever cook a casserole? You know, these things are basically designed to help you get yes questions, or help them say yes between 5 and 7 times, like at least that many. Like, that's my goal, is to help identify that need, because they're like, actually, yeah, I do cook these things. So, and also all these things that, I mean, I've given you some bullet points to look at on the handout, but, you know, make sandwiches, I'm thinking spatula spreader. Chop veggies, I'm thinking any chef knife. Grill out, I'm thinking barbecue tools and, you know, butcher knife or hearty slicer or something like that. Bake, I'm thinking, you know, spatula spreader or, you know, bacon serve set. Watermelon, butcher knife, potatoes, cheese knife, lemons and limes, paring knife or trimmer, casserole. You know, that's, you know, the kitchen tools, stuff like that. So, you know, basically what I'm doing is kind of setting it up for certain things I could bring up, or just really tying them into the pieces in the set. Like, yeah, all these pieces are perfect for what you do, Ms. Jones. So that helps identify that need, to be like, oh yeah, I really do use that stuff. So they realize that they need it more than they thought. All right, so tip number 7, help you build massive value. So I use this phrase. This is basically when I get to closer to the end, and it's to help you build that value. And it's right before I get into the guarantees. So I like to say it costs more, but it's worth it because. So again, I'm trying to make them think that this knife set is going to be like 10 freaking grand. Like that's the whole concept during this part. So I want them to think that they're about to drop like 10 G's on this Cutco and they want to do it. Like that's the whole concept. So it costs more, but it's worth it because. So I started off by saying, Miss Jones, I'm going to tell you the 5 things that make Cutco the Rolls Royce of cutlery. So number 1 is the universal wedge lock handle. So it was designed by Thomas Lamb, who tested over 700 pairs of hands before he decided that this design we have can fit in anyone's hand, left or right-handed, no matter the size. So he actually designed Porsche steering wheels, polio crutches, and airplane joysticks. And he devoted his life to find the perfect fit for hands. We actually spent over $1 million on this handle design. And it costs more, but it's worth it because it doesn't matter how you're going to hold it. Cutco, when you're holding a Cutco knife, you're going to hold it the right way every time. And number 2 is the thermo resin for the handles. And it's the same material as bowling balls, professional football helmets, and dishwasher racks. So, it costs more to have that material, but it's worth it because, if it's the same material as dishwasher racks, what do you think? Yeah, it's dishwasher safe. Also, footballs and or football helmets and bowling balls, take a lot of, just a lot of damage, a lot of, just force happen to those things all the time. And obviously they stick together really well. So, it handles all the tough duties you might need to. And then number 3 is full tang nickel silver rivets. So it costs more to have full tang nickel silver rivets, but it's worth it because you have that metal go all the way through the handle. And also, we have high carbon stainless surgical steel. So it's the same steel that surgeons use. So it will stay sharp. It's rust resistant and it has a great balance. So it costs more to have that high quality steel go all the way through the handle, but it's worth it because it'll have a better balance and it's very sturdy for the construction. So it'll take any force that you're trying to put down on it. And next is the double D edge. So costs more to have that double D edge, but like I said, it's worth it because it's the same that we actually licensed it for eye surgeries at one point because it's so sharp. And we don't make serrated knives, Miss Jones. That's why we actually have 3 straight edges in between every tooth. Because, other knife brands like Hinkle's, Wusthof, Shun, any of those are made for chefs, but Cutco understands that not everyone's a chef. So, it doesn't matter how you're trying to cut, it'll cut in any direction you want it to. So it costs more to have that edge, but it's worth it because it'll cut in any direction you want. And it's really the most ergonomic design in a blade. And then this next phrase I use, I put it on bullet point number 7, but it kind of leads into tip number 8. So how that works is if one of these knives, Miss Jones, was $500, what kind of guarantees would you want that knife to have? And they're like, oh, like a lifetime guarantee. Okay, Miss Jones, well, just so you know, lifetime guarantee, they took it to court and it only needs to last about 7 years, or whatever the company deems the lifetime of the product. So, but what Cutco has is not a lifetime guarantee. We actually have a forever guarantee. And let me show you how that works. And then I go through the guarantees, and that's step 8 is helping you eliminate the let me think about it. But I go through the guarantees, and I also let them know that we have basically that it's a forever guarantee. Doesn't matter who bought it, doesn't matter how long they had it, they don't need a receipt with it. As long as it's Cutco, it's guaranteed forever. And when I'm talking about it, when I go through each guarantee, and when I get to the 3-week trial, and just so you know, guys, I know it's 15 days, but it's 15 business days. They don't count the weekend, so it's really 3 weeks to try it out. So I say right when I get to the 3-week trial, I say I never have anyone tell me that they have to think about it because they actually have 3 weeks to try it out. So this time of year, it's really hard to get the husband and wife together. So all they have to do is put down a 1/5 payment. So just to try it out. Worst case scenario, they have the Rolls Royce of cutlery in their kitchen for 3 weeks and then they get all their money back. Best case scenario, they fall in love with it and use it the rest of their life. So it's really a win-win. And also, I want to give you my personal guarantee, Miss Jones, that you're going to love your Cutco, because my whole family has Cutco. My grandmother's had it for over 30 years. And, personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable showing something that I didn't personally believe in. And, whatever your story is, if you know someone with Cutco, or, you've had your family members had Cutco for a long time, or you just really like selling it, like, you can say any of those things. And then, by the way, do you have my number saved? Yeah, I just want to make sure you have my number saved in case you have any questions in the future. So I like to say that because it kind of helps tie them into you and you being their kitchen consultant. And I just have them say my name is Cutco, whatever your first name is, just so they can just type in Cutco and your name will pop up. And then number 9 is creating a buying mindset. So I say this phrase right when I get to the end and right when the video ends. So let's review on why so many people choose to invest in Cutco. You'll always have sharp American-made knives that are comfortable, safe, and sanitary. They're made out of the highest quality materials and backed by a forever guarantee. So it's one of the last knives you'll ever have to buy, or one of the last knife sets, excuse me. And, drop the word set as many times as you can. And lastly, we offer bun coverage. You know what bun coverage is? You're like, no, what is that? And it's buy once, use every day, never replace. So your buns are covered. And I put finger guns in there just so you guys know that's important. And but seriously, is the next step. So I say that, they laugh about it because you want to add a joke right in the end just to cut the tension and make them feel like, like kind of let their walls down, because they're expecting, the video's ending. They're expecting you to then, it's like, okay, here comes the close. And you kind of catch them off guard with a joke. And that's the point, to kind of create that buying mindset. So that's tip number 9, is creating buying mindset. But I make the joke and we laugh about it. And then I say, no, but seriously, Miss Jones, can you think of anything that you use in your house every single day and would never have to replace it? And I kind of pause there. And it's important to pause because you want to give them time to think about it. Like, it's a serious question. You want them to try and answer it. And then number 10 is to initiate the proper drop down. So personally, it should be anyone, honestly, is you want to start as high as possible for the drop down so you don't have to drop, so you have a lot less to drop down. So if you're going through the video and they show the essential set, I kind of downplay it a little bit because I'm like, Miss Jones, I'm talking about it. I'm like, Miss Jones, so that's the essential set. And, it's more for people who are, just getting married. It's a good wedding gift, or it's also good for, just getting your kid when they go off to college, just so they have some knives to use in their dorm. So, and then they're like, okay, that's not really for me. That's what they're thinking. And, so you don't want them to start at the essential, because then you only have like the studio to drop down to, and you don't really have much to drop down. You only have a couple of steps there. So I want to start high so I have a lot more steps. So basically how I start off is I go through the presentation, they see the video, and then I'm like, so we do actually have, these are our 3 most popular sets, but we do actually have one bigger set. So do you want to see what the biggest one is? Just for fun. And I always, you want to make sure you ask. That's important. You want to ask, and then they openly say, yeah, let's go ahead and see it. So, it's really their decision. You're just framing it up the right way. So you don't want to be like, oh, I'm just going to show you the biggest one, okay? Like, because then it seems pushy. It seems like you're just trying to get the biggest one. But I say, do you want to see the biggest one? Just for fun. And then I smile, and that's important. And then I start off, and you show the complete set, and then you show them the price of that. And you want to make sure that you say it in the smallest way possible. I don't say the full price. And, I'm not going to be like, oh, yeah. And then, when you're dropping down, like I said, the homemaker set, I'm not going to say the homemaker set is $1,326, Miss Jones. What do you think of that? I mean, that sounds like, whoa. Like, that sounds like a massive number. But if I'm like, yeah, it's only $1,326, it shows confidence, and it shows that you're like, yeah, that's not that big of a number. Like, and I mean, it might seem big to you, but you got to play it off as it's not, because, they spent $1,000 on stuff all the time, like in one thing. So, I mean, people do that all the time. Like, people like replace their windows in their house and their down payment is a couple grand. And so, but anyway, the point is you want to make sure that like, yeah, so you want to say the price the right way. But when I get down to the homemaker, I'm going to show them the like, I would drop down. So I start with the complete set. Then we go to the signature. If that doesn't work, then we're at the homemaker. And it's like, so you just had a way bigger drop down than picking one of the three and then having to drop down from there. They already said no 3 times at that point. So then it's easier to get them on the Galley because the Galley is the answer to this next part. So they're like, yeah, no, about the homemaker. I'm like, okay, well, is it too much money or too many knives? And then whichever the answer is, the Galley is the answer. So it's like, yeah, it's just too much money. It's like, okay, well, the Galley set is for people who love the homemaker. It's just a little bit too much for their budget. All they did was take out the 2 knives people use the least. And, you know, it just makes it a little bit more cost effective for you. Or they take out 2 of the most expensive knives in the set. And, you know, so if it's too many knives, it's like, yeah, so they just took out the 2 knives customers use the least, the butcher and the carver. Or they took out the 2 most expensive knives in the set, the butcher or the carver. Either one. I mean, like either way it goes, it's like, oh, so the Galley is the perfect thing. It's under $1,000, you know, so it really helps them kind of understand like why the Galley would be a good set. And also, guys, like I said in the beginning, you want to write down those numbers because if they say the homemaker set is too much, you know, if you take the price of the homemaker, you divide that by 5, you get the monthly payment. Then you divide that by 4, that's the weekly payment. It's only about 66, 70, about like $70 a week. They probably spend about $80 if they eat out of a family of 4. And then it's like, yeah, so if you just eat in one more night a week, Miss Jones, it actually pays for itself. And then, you know, over the course of the year, you'll actually be saving money by the time you're done with it. So that's why it's important to ask that question in the beginning because they're going to give you an honest answer. And then at the end, you can kind of use it as that logic we talked about. But again, don't say the full price. If you're going to say it shortened. Like, and even I don't say like, oh, it's only $123 or something like that. It's like, it's only $123 today, Miss Jones. Like saying 100 is just like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, it's only 123. They're like, oh, okay. You know, you're playing it off like it's not that big of a deal and, you know, they're going to take it the same way. So don't say the full price and write it out when you can. Like using that whiteboard feature is money. Like putting that down. It's like, yeah, so the price is only this much altogether and this much today. And I always like to circle the monthly. So I circle the monthly so they're like, oh, yeah, only that much. Okay, I can afford that today. But yeah, guys, so those are my top 10 tips. 1 is love the one you're with. 2 is to know your customer. 3 is that opening value phrase. 4 is becoming the kitchen consultant. 5 is creating massive credibility. 6 is identifying a need. 7 is building massive value. 8 is eliminating the let me think about it. 9 is creating a buying mindset. And 10 is to initiate the proper drop down. So that's what I got for you.
Dylan, thank you for sharing the goods, my friend. Awesome, awesome, awesome stuff.